Okay, so now we've gone through almost every part of this cycle of unhealthy habits. We've looked already at triggers. We've talked about the automatic thoughts, the conditioned feelings, the behaviors, whether they're in control or out of control. And the only thing we haven't talked about at this point is the guilt, shame, and fear, the additional thoughts that we add into the cycle every time it repeats itself against our will or automatically based on what our trauma brain is doing. So that's what we're going to do today. This lesson won't be a super long one because I think you have everything that you need to start looking at your behaviors and looking at what you do in response to triggers to help you identify where you want to be going next. We want to remember this is your trauma brain on vacation, right? It's lying in a hammock because it's already done its job. It's already registered every danger, and it's got you being aware of every danger so that you can actually keep yourself safe. The only problem is that the things that protected you before are not the things that you need to be using now because they're not useful. We've already talked about that. But the trauma brain is only interested in conserving energy. So because of that, we need to remember it, and we're going to now retrain our brains so that it responds differently to those things that the trauma brain thinks it has in the bag. Remember that the lazy brain of PTSD has self-protection on replay, like a broken record. So broken records skip. I don't know, maybe some of you have never been exposed to a record player, but broken records will skip or play the same thing over and over again, and that's where the analogy comes from. So we want to get out of self-protection on replay. The really good news is that my bag of triggers and issues and traumas stays the same over time, and so does yours. We wouldn't want to trade them, because if we traded them, then I would have to get to know a whole new set, and so would you. So the really good news is, while the brain is doing this on replay, all we have to do is watch it. And as we watch it, we can get really good clues about what it's doing so that we can shift. So more about the lazy brain habits. This is supposed to be a slide that has cars going by really fast. For some reason it's not working in PowerPoint, but that's okay. You get the idea. The lazy brain habits, because the PTSD brain has been replaying this whole cycle around every trigger we've ever had. Every time it goes through that cycle, it goes faster. So it will go fast and go right through all those responses, whether we're responding to an actual trigger that's in front of us, something that happens in our space, or thoughts or memories about that trigger. So we can think about, it's funny, I used to believe that when mistakes happened, it meant that I was stupid. And one of the telltale signs that I was having a thought or memory about something that had happened, usually interpersonally, that made me feel stupid, right? A mistake, or saying something that someone might have criticized, or telling something about myself where my family said that we want to keep all of those things secret, is that I used to burst out if a thought came into my mind that triggered me into feeling stupid. I would literally out loud go, la la la, like that. And so it was a compulsive behavior to just shout out la 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 until I figured out what it was. And all of those la la la, it never happened in the context of relationship where it was actually happening. If I got triggered in relationship, I would withdraw. But if I thought about it later, I would do that la la la. There it was, a sign that I had been triggered, but it was based on just a memory of something that had happened. The other thing is that these lazy brain habits become compulsive behaviors that we aren't aware of, especially in relationship, or more recently that I've told you about my behaviors in the kitchen. I had the ability to change the way I feel and much more at ease in the kitchen. And yet, for all of my adult years, so I would say from the time I was 23 until I'm 54, well, that's 30 years, not being aware that it was compulsive behavior in the kitchen, to compulsively run away when I was in the kitchen. Also, going into freeze, which is kind of a dissociative state when I'm in relationship. So I would be in my head constantly being super hyper vigilant to make sure that I'm not doing anything wrong and watching my behavior all of the time instead of relaxing. So that is a compulsive behavior that would show up, which I wasn't even aware of until my fiance says to me, "It feels like you're ignoring me. Every time I say thank you, you never say you're welcome." He said that to me. I realized, oh, I'm constantly in my head trying to scan the environment and make sure I'm doing the right things and not doing anything wrong. And so that's a compulsive behavior. I was not even aware that I didn't say you're welcome. I never said you're welcome. I wasn't even aware of it. So what I was able to do was, as I tell you, focus on one trigger at a time. I was able to focus anytime I heard him say, "Thank you." I made it a point to myself to always say you're welcome, which all that is a movement from inaction to action that actually helped me break that up. But it really requires our attention and awareness before we can make the shift. Oh, look, there's the fast cars. So there it is. The faster our triggers go, the more we practice them, the faster they go. So there you go. That's the graphic you should have seen when I first turned it on. We're going to leave it like that. It's fine. So the thing that I want you to realize is that once we've done the behavior that we don't like, the next thing that we experience, we paint ourselves into a corner with guilt, shame, and fear. So guilt is, oh my God, I've done something wrong. I can't believe I've done something wrong. When am I ever going to get it right? I feel so bad about it. Right? So getting into negative talk to ourselves about making a mistake. Shame is, there's something wrong with me and I'll never be okay and I'm never going to be able to be good in relationship and I'm so ungrateful, right? If I had never said you're welcome. I'm so ungrateful for having this wonderful partner and I ignore him. What's wrong with me? Or fear. Now, fear was the one that was killing my attention to prevent me from interacting socially and causing me to shut down. When we're in those guilt, shame, and fear, we cannot pay attention to what it is that we should be paying attention to be able to change the habit. That's why I say on this slide, don't get stuck. We don't want to be stuck in guilt, shame, or fear. When we make a mistake, when we find ourselves doing compulsive behavior, instead of beating ourselves up for it, saying, okay, there's something here I still need to figure out about what's going on with me. I'm going to stay open and curious and compassionate toward myself and give myself a break because there's some really good reason that this is happening, and listen more, pay attention more to figure out what's really underneath this. Okay, so again, guilt, shame, and fear don't serve you. There's two kinds of guilt. One is appropriate guilt, the other is inappropriate guilt. If you're intentionally doing something wrong to harm someone, you should feel bad about that. That's appropriate guilt. If your trauma brain is taking over things and you're having trouble changing your behaviors to what it is that you value instead of what it is you're conditioned to, making those mistakes is not on purpose. That is totally not on purpose. It's accidental. You shouldn't feel guilt about that. So please don't let these killers of attention stop you from doing your work. Remember, everything you've been through was scary and painful. So when some of these feelings will come up, you will feel afraid. You will have pain. But those belong to a different time and you've already survived it. If you're safe now, then look at those feelings. They really can't hurt you now. You've already survived them. I know I've already said this, but it's a really important idea to claim for yourself. If you're safe now, those feelings cannot hurt you. You cannot be hurt now like you were hurt before if you're actually safe. So here we go on this slide. We want to slow down. To retrain the brain, we want to slow down and look at what happened. We either need to watch what happens when we're doing that behavior that we don't like, that we prefer not to be doing. Watch while it's happening. And when I say watch, I mean watch what's happening in our trauma brain. What am I saying to myself? What are the feelings? But really, what am I saying to myself? And then remember right should say remember right after. So there's an error in this slide. It's watch in the present while it's going on, if you are practicing watching a trigger that you're working on specifically, or after it happens. Think about it right afterwards to help you pinpoint what's happening in your thoughts that's leading to those compulsive behaviors. And then once we've identified the need, then we can choose a plan of action that meets the need. And once we've met our need, then the unhealthy habit or the compulsive behavior that comes from the trauma, the survival trauma habit, actually gets weaker because you're meeting the need directly instead of trying to find substitutes to make fear go away. So here's your homework. I want you again, just like last week, to work deeper into what it is that you're understanding about this cycle. Also, write down any questions that have come up for you while you're doing this work. I'm not expecting you to be able to do this work independently. I'm not expecting you to be able to do it without support. So write your questions down. If you would like to come to the live Q&A and bring questions there so that they can be answered for everyone, because it's likely other people are struggling just like you, then come to the Wednesday live Zoom Q&A inside the Trauma Erased Method group in Trauma Free Nation, and I'll answer those questions. But if you feel shy about it and you're struggling, then send me a private message in the community, and I'll make sure to bring that in and answer the question on Wednesday, and then you can watch the answer where we'll get into more detail. I'm trying to give you a foundation to help you understand what this work looks like, but I'm expecting struggles because nobody gets it the first time. So please write down your questions, continue to write down your observations, and bring them to me and let me help. So next week, we're going to be talking about how our body history collides with, interferes with how we get our needs met. So if I put that in more basic terms, our basic needs weren't met in childhood. And when they weren't met in childhood, because that's what happens when trauma happens, when that occurs, then our body history gets filled with rules that say things like, it's not okay for me to want to feel safe in relationship. It's not okay for me to want to eat healthy food. It's not okay for me to stop eating when I'm full. It's not, and I'm just thinking of a few. It's not okay for me to say no to somebody else if they're feeling sad. It's not okay for me to take care of my own needs and not someone else's. So those are, if you hear some of the things that I've just said to you, those are the foundations of beliefs that go with triggers. So next week, we're going to talk about how to take those things apart. So work on what you've got so far. Remember to breathe. Remember to use the tools that you've learned in the earlier weeks. And I'll see you next week, week number 6, and we'll start looking at how our basic needs are impacted by trauma. We'll see you then.